Lindsay Davis and David Muir wrapping this presidential debate between former President Donald Trump and Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. You could not have two more different candidates with two more different approaches to the task at hand here. I had a television executive once tell me that everything you need to know about a live event on television, you can tell with the sound off. And if you had the sound off for this debate, which I'm sure nobody did, what you would have seen was Trump looking physically hunched, angry, squinting. I never saw the whites of his eyes the entire debate, shouting, constantly interrupting himself, not just going down tangents, but being unable to finish a thought, seeming very frustrated, very angry, very negative, and very tired. In contrast, Kamala Harris appeared to be sort of light on her feet, quite puzzled by him. The two-shot of him squinting and hunching and seeming to be having physical trouble squeezing the words out, certainly squeezing the sentences out, while she just looked at him absolutely puzzled by where it was he was going. I think that visual may be as much of a takeaway as anything that was said. That said, boy, what was said? Trump repeatedly coming back to the same lines over and over again about world crime rates being low, and that being the explanation for America having high crime rates. He said strange things like all Democrats wanted Roe versus Wade overturned. He said that it is legal to kill children in the United States. He insisted that he saw something on television about eating dogs. That was one of the weirdest moments of the debate, saying he saw it on television, so therefore he knows it's true, and so therefore what the police said about it can't be true. Kamala Harris kept going back to her plan, her campaign, but also kept going directly at him. She told him that military leaders who have worked with him have told her that Donald Trump is a disgrace. As she said to him, that you are a disgrace. She described him as confused and unable to understand that he lost the election. She said he was fired by 81 million people, and he's having a very difficult time processing that. She said he was handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times. She said people leave his rallies early due to exhaustion and boredom. In talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, she said Putin would be sitting in Kyiv, if he were president, with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch? I've never seen a starker contrast in presentation from two candidates in any debate, in any type of contest, in any political race.
I think that's because there hasn't been one. Now, I think that we all know that maximum humility is required of us, particularly in the next 57 days. We do not know the outcome of the election.
Yeah.
But if these matter at all in the outcomes of said elections, it should be over. Because she didn't just prevail in every exchange. She prevailed at the humaning. Questions that were deeply personal, she turned into questions not about herself, not about her campaign, not about the Democratic Party, not even about Donald Trump, but about the country. The whole beginning was, I don't know if he noticed, his synapses did not seem to be firing, but she got out her entire economic agenda, the thing that Chris Christie suggested she do, use this as an opportunity to say which
in the first 2 minutes.
She did it in about the first 8 minutes.
Yeah.
It was all out there. You know, to the degree that Trump has support because his supporters are scared or nostalgic about an America that's slipping away. I suppose that was somewhere in there. You know, for what it's worth, the Drudge Report has him, you know, a picture of him with the cat saying it's over. I mean, and to the degree that it's our job to cover what the campaigns do and the political apparatus, the Trump campaign is going to plans B, C, and D, and they have them. You know, they're dark and they're dirty and they're heinous.
What do you mean?
You know, they're going to the types of things that Trump tweeted about, the threats, the retribution, the placement of allies on election boards, as they've done in the state of Georgia. Because this did not win Trump any new voters.
Lawrence?
You know, we are now seeing maybe the second presidential debate in history where Poland might be the deciding issue. that point you isolated, 800,000 Polish people in the state of Pennsylvania. Kamala Harris reached out directly to those voters. If she got 10,000 of them to focus on the threat to Poland that Vladimir Putin represents, she may have won the presidential election in that particular response. Let's start at the beginning. When they entered, I was wondering what was going to happen. Would there be a handshake?
Yeah.
We're going to see that video more than once. It's Donald Trump running away from her. It's Donald Trump trying to turn away as the adult in the room approaches and crosses to do what every presidential candidate before her has done in that situation, which is to extend her hand to the other candidate. And Donald Trump runs away from it until he can't. She literally has to corner him to shake his hand, and she does it. Two things I would point out quickly about it. You heard the person who was president of the United States on January 6th say to the American people, I wasn't responsible for security. President of the United States, commander-in-chief is what this job is about, and he's saying when they're attacking the Capitol and I'm doing nothing for 2 hours and more than 2 hours, I wasn't responsible for security. Another thing you isolated where he said that Democrats and everyone wanted Roe versus Wade overturned. Here's the problem with that lie. That's his worst lie of the night, because he was lying to the voters about the voters.
Yeah.
He was lying about you, and you know it. More than 60% of the country is sitting there saying, he's lying about me. I'm a Republican, and I didn't want Roe overturned. I'm a Democrat. I'm an independent. I didn't want Roe overturned. He actually lied directly to the voters about the voters.
Joy?
I think the moment that the debate went completely sideways for Donald Trump was the moment when Vice President Harris was very smart about saying I'm the only person. This was an answer about immigration. David Muir asked about illegal border crossings. We knew that question was coming, that they were going to talk about that, talking about it reaching a record high, numbers have dropped, blah, blah, blah. She says, I'm the only person on this stage who's prosecuted transnational gangs trafficking drugs and human beings. She talks about that bill that was on the table that Donald Trump called Republicans and said, don't vote for because he wanted the issue, but he didn't want to solve the problem. He just wanted the issue for the election. And then she did what I think is the smartest thing of the night, and it is the thing that we got from Hillary Clinton that she was being advised to do. Get him with the one thing that will completely destabilize him for the rest of the debate, and it did. And you named it before. It's when he said, essentially, she said that we need a leader who focuses on solutions. He's going to talk about immigration when it's not even the subject, because he kept going back to the millions of people and they're all criminals. And he kept doing it, and she called him on it. And she said, note that he's going to talk about immigration when it's not the question. And I invite you to attend one of his rallies where he talks about Hannibal Lecter. And I want you to know that people at these rallies start leaving early. What you won't hear him talk about is you. That ended Donald Trump's, the cheese being firmly affixed to the cracker.
Yeah.
He literally, after that, could not stop interrupting. He could not stop going back. He could not stop going right back to his special place where he went on about immigration. He argued. He then turned around and interrupted and tried to keep arguing about crowd size. He tried to say we're going to World War III. He said millions of towns, Aurora, Springfield. He said that multiple times. They're eating dogs and cats. It was after that he went into the dogs and cats. David Muir breaks in and says, no, sir. There is no credible reporting about that. He kept rambling. I think what Vice President Harris managed to do was every single thing that the campaign beforehand said they wanted her to do. She got her policy points out. After this debate, what people will think about when they think about Vice President Harris is $25,000 for building a first home, $50,000 for a new business. They will think about the $6,000 tax credit because she kept saying it.
Yeah.
And what he kept saying was rambling, bizarre nonsense that made him look old. It made him look unstable. It made him look not just unpresidential, but the look that was on Vice President Harris's face. I kept screenshotting her face. The look said pity. Yeah. She looked like she pitied him. And she kept looking at him like, are you okay? Yeah. And she finally said, I think you're having a hard time connecting with reality. Donald Trump got destroyed in this debate because he can't control his mind. And you don't want a president of the United States that is not in full control of his mind.
It was by far the best debate performance against Donald Trump ever by anyone, I think.
Look, including quick parentheses, it may very well be the best televised debate performance ever.
Yeah,
I cannot think of a better one.
I thought it was exceptional. I thought it's the best anyone's ever done against him. Both Republicans in Republican primaries and those big group brawls and one-on-one, even though I think both Biden and Hillary had acquitted themselves well against him. The thing that she did, and it almost became like comical at a certain point, was she's doing two things every time. What do I want to communicate? Because we're talking about how do you negotiate this, right? How much him, how much you? What do I want to communicate about what I'm doing? And then, in the midst of that, just this little lure for the fish, and it could be John McCain. You know, if you bring up John McCain, he's going to litigate John McCain. Yes. It could be very fine people at Charlottesville. You know, if you bring up very fine people, he's going to swim upstream to go talk about very fine people. It could be suckers and losers. He's going to go talk about suckers and losers. Every single time she would communicate, and then she would leave dangling this bait. And he would swim up to the bait. And the bait was always a thing that Donald Trump is obsessed with about himself.
Yes.
A grievance, a thing in the past, the well-worn things that we've heard him go on and on about. Nancy Pelosi was the reason that January 6th got attacked, yada, yada. And every one of them just served to reaffirm the fact that the guy is old, out of it, and obsessed with his old grievances. And I will just say as a final point, to your point on humility, I have no idea. Like, you could come out of this and the polling's going to be exactly the same. Yeah. Or you could tell me that some group of swing voters are like, I don't know. I don't have the mind of a swing voter, obviously. I don't know. I don't know. I'm humble on that. Yeah. What I saw was someone totally outmatched in every single way.
Can I just add, though?
No, you go. You go.
I think that we have all been tough and critical of the press. ABC did a very fine job.
Yes,
they did
excellent
reporting on the eating of pets.
Yes, which is important. Like, you got to say it.
I mean, and I think sometimes people are reluctant to put themselves in a story. David Muir didn't hesitate to say, I went back and watched the tape. You didn't sound sarcastic to me when you said I lost by a whisker. Kyle Myers got Trump on three sides of whether or not he won in 2020. He said I won, and then he said, I said sarcastically that I lost by a whisker, and then David Muir ended it by saying, no, that wasn't sarcastic. So what the American people heard was Trump on three sides of the outcome of 2020. And David Muir and Lindsay Davis played an important role in that.
They were excellent. I think kudos to them because they did just enough fact checking not to be to be a part of the debate, but to make sure that, really egregious lies were shut down. The one thing I would add is theatrically, what Vice President Harris did that I thought was very smart was that when she was saying something about Donald Trump, particularly when she was talking about the way foreign governments that she has interacted with think about him, she looked at him.
Yes.
And he would not look at her.
He would not.
He would not look at her. He stayed and he glowered into the camera. And that two-shot, I think, puts her at a stature so far above him. He looked weak and he looked afraid because he wouldn't look her in the eye. And she said, you are a disgrace. And I'm not saying I'm saying you're a disgrace. I'm saying that the people that I speak with that are heads of
military leaders who have worked with you, tell me that you are a disgrace. And in order to say you, she has to turn to him, and he can't bear it.
He can't bear it. And then he, in his own defense, he goes to Viktor Orban. And you could almost hear the entire audience laughing because you're like, you've got to be kidding. That's your defense, Viktor Orban. And his other good one was when he tried to explain how it was his idea to get out of Afghanistan, but it was a terrible idea. He says, well, he names like a random name of an Arabic name and says, well, that guy loves me. Yeah. Like he didn't have anyone that he could point to that was like a character witness.
He also invented a head of the Taliban named Abdul. Which is not the name of the head of the Taliban, just to be clear. He just randomly named him. Just one more thing, and then I know we have colleagues, whatever, but just on the abortion answer, which was to me was the worst moment in the first debate because Joe Biden got asked an abortion question and he just did not deliver the answer that, is right there. She destroyed him on the abortion answer. She talked about why we're here. She talked about the consequences in the real world of women bleeding out in a parking lot waiting to get care because they have a miscarriage that they cannot be treated, and 12-year-old survivors of incest. She completely destroyed him on it. She sort of gave him no territory to like wiggle away from it. And also, he refused to say he would veto a national ban.
Yes, and
Which he could, and J.D. Vance said he could. He could have, and he didn't.
It's now 11 o'clock on the East Coast. You are watching our coverage of the second presidential debate, the first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, which concluded just a few minutes ago in Philadelphia. I mean, Chris, to your point about news being made here, Trump refused to say that he would veto a national abortion ban. Trump also repeatedly refused to say that he thinks or thinks that it would be good or wants for Ukraine to win the war against Russia.
Yeah,
given half a dozen opportunities.
Yes, he would not say it. And then he talks about how he's very concerned about the number of troops that Russia has lost after they invaded another sovereign country. I mean, it was stunning. Joy, to your point about the way that Kamala Harris turned it to him directly, I just want to read that part from the transcript. Kamala Harris says to the camera, Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly, he's having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as vice president. World leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I mean, he cannot bear the idea of somebody laughing at him. World leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom work, and then she turns, with you. And they say, you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate over and over again about court cases you've lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about that fact. And that's deeply troubling. And the American people deserve better. That is playing those two tracks that you're talking about, Chris, the camera talking to people at home and talking to her opponent in ways that deeply, deeply rattled him. And she's able to do it in the same answer. Joining us now, I'm honored to say, is the Democratic vice presidential nominee and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Governor Walz, I really appreciate you making time to be with us here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. Great night. A great night.
You were at a watch party in Arizona. You think it was a great night. Tell us how you assess your running mate's performance this evening.
Yeah, I'm out here in Mesa, and folks across the country got to see a president for all Americans. You saw Kamala Harris conduct herself with dignity. She laid out a clear vision forward, one that's an opportunity economy we keep talking about, ability to own a home, making sure prescription drugs are not too expensive, and tackling the real problems and doing it all with grace and dignity. And then on the other side, look, I don't know how other to describe it. You saw a nearly 80-year-old angry narcissist continue to veer off into things that in any other setting might actually be funny, but they're dangerous in this setting. They're dangerous because this guy anywhere near the White House is simply unacceptable. But I think the good news is a lot of Americans are going to see this clip. These things are going to go around. They're going to talk to their neighbors, and they're going to see what Vice President Harris is bringing to them. She talks about them. He talks about himself. She talks about real issues. He goes on tangents that are hard to follow. So I have to tell you, I'm excited about this. It's what we all knew. I'm glad more people are engaging, and we've got an opportunity. All of this, doing it with joy. A politics of joy, a politics of possibilities versus this just increasingly dark. Look, what I say is, Rachel, this guy's rooting against America. He's rooting for failure. He does not want good news. He does not want good economic news. He does not want to see unemployment, inflation going down. He wants to see the worst because whatever twisted vision he has, he thinks he's the guy to fix it when he's the guy who started the problem. So she did a great job. I'm really proud of her.
You know, your running mate, Vice President Harris, one of the things that she was just getting praised for at this table here was that she, right out of the gate, was able to get to a lot of the details of her policy proposals, the kinds of practical proposals that you're talking about, things like child tax credit and a big tax deduction for startup businesses and for first-time homeowners. And she laid out those things, and those things, it's important, obviously, to communicate those things to the American people with such a big audience. Tens of millions of people are watching tonight. It wasn't necessarily news, though, because we know that's what she's running on. On the other side, the other candidate, former President Trump, did make a bunch of news tonight. He refused to say whether or not he would sign a national abortion ban. He refused to say that Ukraine should win the war in Russia, and that would be better. He was asked, 9 years after you first said you wanted to get rid of Obamacare, do you yet have your own health care plan? And he responded by saying, I have concepts of plans. I mean, all of this was, among other things, it was new information in terms of Donald Trump's plans. I wonder if that changes anything for you in terms of thinking about how to campaign against him and his running mate.
Americans should know. We know what a non-answer is when he's talking about this. Of course he would not sign a ban against that because he wants it. He's the one who ruined Roe. He brags about it all the time. Of course he's not going to do anything with Ukraine because he wants Putin, his buddy, to be in there, and he wants to undermine our alliances that have kept peace in the world. These non-answers are as clear as anything. He can't answer them. And again, when you ask him for a plan, 9 years on health care, we know what he's going to do. He's going to destroy the ACA, get rid of pre-existing condition protections. He's going to attack Social Security and Medicare. And the one thing I say, Rachel, is he is clear about he will give tax cuts to the wealthy because that's the one thing he actually followed through with. So he has no plan. When I travel, and we all see this, when I was at the D-Day memorial, it was clear that other countries deeply concerned with Donald Trump coming back, deeply concerned that his inability to do anything other than a transactional shakedown of our historical allies, as we sat on the beaches of Normandy, where Americans died, protecting Europe, but protecting us. That's the thing. You give in on Ukraine, it empowers China, it empowers Putin, it empowers dictators. But again, one example. He was asked for one world leader who was with him, and it's Orban. My God, that's all you need to know. You've got a leader in Kamala Harris that understands the importance of these alliances. She understands what it truly means to stand up for the Western democracies, and she truly means to talk about others. Donald Trump talked about himself 99% of the time, and if he wasn't talking about that, he was talking about Orban. So it was couldn't have been clearer. Couldn't have been clearer. And I'd just like to say, if I can make my plug, she did her job. Americans need to do theirs. Get engaged. Get the facts. Go to KamalaHarris.com. Go down and do some door knocking. Talk to your neighbor. Talk to your relatives. It was clear tonight that there is only one person on that stage that should be president of the United States, and that was Kamala Harris.
One of the more interesting and I think unpredictable moments in the debate, Governor Walz, was a back and forth with the former president about whether or not he believes that he won or lost the last election. He has made some contrary remarks about this in recent days. He tried to claim, I think not very credibly, and was called out by one of the moderators, tried to claim that those recent comments were meant sarcastically, as if he had been joking. It really didn't seem at the moment like he was. The reason this isn't just about 2020, it's not just about 4 years ago, it's about now, is because presumably his attitude toward American elections carries through from the last one to this next one. And I have to ask if you and your campaign and Vice President Harris are fully expecting that even if you wipe the floor with him, even if you win by a lot in November, that he is going to enlist the entire Republican Party, both nationally and in every state that he can, in trying to claim falsely that he won.
Yeah, that's who this guy is. And let's be very clear. This is a threat to the democracy. It is the most treasonous thing you can do to undermine what was fair and free election. He's never had anybody support anything other than a pillow guy support his insane rhetoric around this. But look, this is dangerous. 140 police officers were hurt and some were killed. This has caused issues across this country. The campaign, we're ready for this. We know it's going to be a tough race. We know that he's not going to probably concede. That's why I say once again to Americans, get out there, get engaged, make sure that we're doing everything necessary. And I'm going to give a huge thank you to those election workers, folks like my mom, who's been a poll watcher for years, folks that are on the Republican, Democrats, Independents, who do the hard work of democracy for no money. They're being put at risk by the recklessness of Donald Trump because he can't, at nearly 80 years old, do something that my fourth graders, when I taught them, did. When you lose a game, you go shake hands and you congratulate the other person and you move on. We're in this together. This guy cares nothing about the democracy. He cares nothing about the American people. He cares about himself and himself only. So again, I appreciate the moderators calling him out on this, re-questioning him on it, making it clear that he's not lost. But look, this guy is a threat. This is going to be a close election. We know it comes down to the battleground states. So for all the listeners out there, we need you. We need you to get engaged. We need you to send a message to this. And I just came a few minutes ago from talking with Mesa Mayor Giles, a Republican, who says I'm a strong Republican. I don't agree with all of your positions, but you are standing in the breach of democracy. Donald Trump is a threat to that, and he proudly stood there with he and his family. That's the type of things we need Americans to do across this country. Kamala Harris is going to be that president for all of us. You don't have to agree with every policy, but it's very clear. She trusts this democracy. She puts the Constitution above everything else. He doesn't. I'm going to get the opportunity to have a debate with someone who's on the stage because Mike Pence sure isn't, because he was willing to put the Constitution above Donald Trump. So we get to continue this conversation over the next 56 days, but it's absolutely critical people know what the threat is.
Governor Walz, I want to ask you about your prep for that debate with J.D. Vance coming up. But while we have been talking, somebody's just handed me something, and I'm going to do sort of a not very TV thing, and I'm going to read it to you in totality. I'm going to read you the whole thing because this was, I don't think you know about this, but this was just posted online by a woman you might have heard of whose name is Taylor Swift. And she has posted this online along with a photo of her cat. And I'm going to read to you what she just posted. Quote, like many of you, I watched the debate tonight. If you haven't already, now is a great time to do your research on the issues at hand and the stances these candidates take on the topics that matter to you the most. As a voter, I make sure to watch and read everything I can about their proposed policies and plans for this country. Recently, I was made aware that AI of me, quote, me, falsely endorsing Donald Trump's presidential run was posted to his site. It really conjured up my fears around AI and the dangers of spreading misinformation. It brought me to the conclusion that I need to be very transparent about my actual plans for this election as a voter. The simplest way to combat misinformation is with the truth. Then she says, quote, I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them. I think she is a steady-handed, gifted leader, and I believe we can accomplish so much more in this country if we're led by calm and not chaos. I was so heartened and impressed by her selection of running mate Tim Walz, who has been standing up for LGBTQ+ rights, IVF, and a woman's right to her own body for decades. I've done my research, and I've made my choice. Your research is all yours to do, and the choice is yours to make. I also want to say, especially to first-time voters, remember that in order to vote, you have to be registered. I also find it's much easier to vote early. I will link where to register and find early voting dates and info in my story. With love and hope, Taylor Swift, signed Childless Cat Lady. I have to get your response to that, Mr. Governor.
All those things, I am incredibly grateful, first of all, to Taylor Swift. I say that also as a cat owner, a fellow cat owner. Look, Swifties, you heard it. We know that it's there. That was eloquent, and it was clear. And that's the type of courage we need in America to stand up. We've seen it out of those Republicans who were at the DNC. We've seen it out of women who would like to have their own personal lives kept personal, but are forced to go out there because they nearly died because they can't get abortion services in a pregnancy. And now you have somebody like Taylor Swift coming out, making that very clear. This would be the opportunity, Swifties. KamalaHarris.com. Get on over there. Give us a hand. Get things going.
Governor Walz, you do have your own debate with J.D. Vance that is coming up and coming up quickly. Have you started prepping for that yet, or do you have thoughts already about how you're going to approach that?
Yeah, I need to. Look, he's Yale law guy. I'm public school teacher, so we know where he's at on that. Sure, I think it's a good opportunity to contrast where we're at. You'll hear me talk like I have about things that impact Americans, making sure they have the opportunity to thrive, making sure that we're being factual in how we talk about that. And so I'm looking forward to it. I'll work hard. That's what I do. I fully expect that Senator Vance, as a United States Senator, a Yale law guy, he'll come well prepared. But I think what you saw tonight is the American public is on the side of truth. The American public is on the side of things that impact their lives in a positive way. And I'll continue to put that out and continue to lift up this incredible vision that Kamala Harris brought out tonight, this incredible just change in our politics to be joyful, hopeful. And look, she did what it is. We can be joyful, but don't mistake her kindness for weakness, because she called that out. And I said, I did enough lunchroom supervision. You put bullies in their place, and she put a bully in his place all night. And right before our eyes, Donald Trump got angrier and smaller and more irrelevant. We need to keep pressure on for 56 days and win this thing.
We don't know yet what the voters will think of tonight's debate. We don't even know yet how many people have tuned in and watched it. The immediate reaction from the political observers who I serve with here at MSNBC was that your running mate, Vice President Harris, essentially wiped the floor with Donald Trump tonight. Joy Reid said the word that she chose was destroyed. Chris Hayes and Lawrence O'Donnell had an interesting colloquy between them as to whether or not this might have been the best televised presidential debate performance ever, not just against Donald Trump, but in any presidential debate. And so, again, we don't know how viewers at large will view it, but I think at least here, our tiny, weird focus group thinks that she did very well. Given that, it doesn't necessarily lend itself toward an obvious next choice. You could just leave it at this and decide that that was a pretty good way to leave yourself in the minds of voters before they head into the voting booth, or you could agree to another debate. I mean, if Donald Trump agreed to do it, do you think that Vice President Harris should debate him again after tonight?
Look, I don't want to speak for her, but I would be there encouraging her to do it every day if she could. We know there's going to be nothing new. It's the same old tired agenda that he brings every time, and she's bringing this new hopefulness, this ability to be able to articulate what Americans are asking for. The agenda that he brings up, no one's asking for that. He can, in his mind, 99% of people, or whatever that is, it's him and whoever else is in his head. Those are the people that are thinking that way. So, look, she'll make that decision. We agreed to these two debates. We will carry them out. We'll see where it goes. But again, I would just encourage Americans, don't believe this thing's over by any stretch. This thing is going to be a margin of error race. We know that it'll be close. We know that there will be attempts to try and discourage people from voting. But Taylor Swift's right. Get registered early, get engaged, and, voting's the entry point. Maybe make a few phone calls, do a door knock. If you can, contribute. Those are the things that help us take this message to every corner of the country.
Democratic vice presidential nominee, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Sir, I know a lot of pressure on your schedule tonight. Thank you so much for spending some of it here with us.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right. Good luck, sir. Let's get back to Philadelphia. Alex is standing by with California Governor Gavin Newsom. Alex.
Thanks, Rachel. Just a few minutes ago, Governor, Donald Trump entered the spin room.
Yeah.
There had been some speculation, some rumors earlier in the day that he might pull a trick like that. I actually was skeptical because I was able to enter this arena with a large hoagie wrapped in brown paper. This was not a highly secure facility for someone who has just survived an assassination attempt. Nonetheless, he was just here, spinning his spin. What do you think that represents in terms of his assessment of
an act of desperation. He knows he got his clock clean. From the moment she came out on stage, when she introduced himself, she had the courage to go over to him, shake his hand, clearly was uncomfortable, and introduced herself as Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris. She commanded the room from the second she came out. She was a commander-in-chief, and she had him on the defense the entire night. If this was a prize fight, it would have been TKO in the second round. She did as well or better than any of us could have hoped for, and I know her well enough to know this: the best is yet to come. She can do that even more. With more experience, more time on the campaign trail, you're going to see the quality of her performance only improve.
We just played that sound of the exchange she had with Donald Trump on his role in overturning Roe v. Wade. Something, at one point, he said he had done a great service to the country by appointing the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe, and then said it was what everybody wanted. Yeah. When you think about the issue that could decide the election, that could be the whole ballgame.
Well, the way she was able to humanize that and talk about 12 and 13-year-olds that have been raped, that are clutching teddy bears as they're giving birth to the rapist babies. I mean, what she didn't say was those same 12 and 13-year-olds in Mississippi, there was one girl that had to bring her kid to 7th grade. That's Donald Trump's America. She was able to bring that to light in a deeply emotional way. That was the most significant and consequential moment of the debate, because she spoke for millions and millions and millions of women and parents like me with 2 daughters. That was a significant moment. And here's why it was significant as well. And it's not an indictment of Joe Biden by any stretch of the imagination, but it shows a differentiator. Yeah. It shows what she is able to bring in terms of her communication, particularly on issues like that, to a whole nother level. And now to this new and expanded audience. And that goes back to why Donald Trump was in the spin room. It was a bad night for him.
Yeah, her ability to talk about abortion in a deeply emotional way is resonant enough that I think it's not just about fathers of daughters or women, but men, people all over the country understand the gravity of those situations.
People are sick of the way women have been treated in this country, sick of the way the LGBTQ community has been treated in this country, sick of how immigrants have been treated in this country. And the African-American community, they're sick of it. That was another great part of this debate. Near the end, when we talked about the issues of race, and she elevated that in a way that gave, I saw there was a young girl, a young African-American girl in the spin room. She walked from the back of the room to the front of the room. I'm almost getting emotional about this. And she was looking at that screen because she saw herself. I mean, that was a different level of attachment. It didn't come from here. That came from here. And that's what she brought tonight. This was not a great night for her. This is a great night for this country, for freedom, for democracy, the rule of law, for social justice and racial justice. I'm just filled with pride. And I'm also filled with pride because that's the Kamala Harris I've known for 30 years. We've been saying this. I know people go, I'm telling you, that Kamala Harris I've known for 30 years. And this levity, she's back in a profound and deep way. And I think this is a tough night for the campaign, for the Trump campaign in another way. How they react to this or how they overreact to this will be more determinative than the punditry in the moment and how the first flash poll moves. I think this was shape-shifting in a deeper way, and it will show itself over the course of the next few weeks.
Well, you know, it's the Kamala Harris that you've known for the last 30 years. It's also the Donald Trump that the country's known for the last 9, maybe even a worse version, the version that talks about pets being barbecued for lunch. He didn't see pets being eaten by dogs and cats, I guess, are breathing a sigh of relief tonight, knowing that at least one person.
Well, no Hannibal Lecter, at least.
But you know, Trump really, you talked before this, we went into this, that Trump has become kind of a bad imitation of himself. And what we saw tonight was a vice president, former prosecutor, laying these traps repeatedly for Trump, who kept walking into them, whether it was his father's silver spoon or the size of his rallies or him being a disgrace on the world stage. Each and every one of them he responded to.
It was too easy. It was too easy. I mean, this just shows how consequential this election was. She laid those traps. I want to compliment her, but they weren't even that complex. They're just trigger words. And you just watched, you saw his physiology, you saw his eye movement, you knew where he was going to go. But it's also what the rest of the world does to Donald Trump. She was absolutely right. I've been in those rooms with foreign leaders all around. I've met with dozens of them. They all say exactly what she said tonight. They're laughing behind his mouth. He's so prone to flattery and, as she said, favor.
And terrified of being humiliated.
How easy manipulated he becomes because he's weak. Weakness masquerading as strength. And that weakness was exposed tonight in a pretty profound and consequential way because it was over 90 minutes and he couldn't get off the mat.
Do you think this debate is the difference maker that needs to happen for, I guess, what it feels like, you know, we're being told is going to be the tightest election of our lifetimes, that there needs to be some meaningful sort of change to move the numbers in any sort of definitive way?
I think we all have to be careful not to overhype. I think we can overanalyze too much punditry. As I say, I think this unfolds over the course of the next few weeks. Let's give you a couple examples. I mean, honestly, I think the Taylor Swift endorsement, how Trump reacts to that and how that can create a few news cycles, how he reacts in terms of his grievance and his pity party on those networks and how he goes out and does these large-scale events and how he just consumed by how unfair this was and how rigged this was. And all of a sudden that can expose itself as even more damaging than just the punditry of the moment, just the situation tonight. So, no, I think it was. That said, I'm a little subjective, candidly, but I cannot objectively imagine in those 60, 80 counties within those 7 swing states that people truly were open argument, interested in evidence, that were really kicking the tire, how anyone could have concluded that there wasn't just one commander-in-chief and her name was Kamala Harris on stage tonight.
Well, it was an eventful evening for both sides of the race.
It's amazing.
Do you think there should be another debate? Do you think there will be another debate?
Absolutely, unequivocally, there should be another debate. And it should be come in October. He said, anytime, anywhere. Let's do it. Why wouldn't we?
All right. Governor Gavin Newsom. I mean, I think we're just going to take this show on the road, Rachel. Just go sell cheese sandwiches out of the back of the VW and follow this ride wherever it goes. Looking for a miracle.
I'd pay good money. I'd buy the T-shirt. I'd do the whole thing. Thanks, you guys. It's great. Joy.
I just want to point out that Taylor Swift has 283 million followers.
Oh.
And 1 million people have already liked that Instagram post. And
it already has 1 million likes, and it only came out during our interview with Tim Wolf?
Yeah.
It happened a little before he came out. Yes, and it's not even the first post she posted. She's posted like 3 other things since then. So Taylor Swift is not just a celebrity. She actually, commands a humongous squad of particularly young white women. And I think it's important to point that out, because one of the places that Democrats have never been able to do well is among white voters, even young white voters, even young white women. Dobbs has changed a lot. But you've also had people like Taylor Swift come in and culturally put forward a version of young womanhood that is super modern. And she has been relentlessly attacked by the J.D. Vance world as being a bad role model because she is unmarried. And so she now is leaning into the exact demographic that J.D. Vance relentlessly targets, that he relentlessly disrespects. And she commands so much popularity among her super fans that they've changed the NFL in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it's not a small endorsement. It's a big deal.
And a lot of her fans are too young to vote and too young to buy concert tickets and don't have revenue streams to afford the concert tickets. So Taylor Swift's fandom is made up of her fans and their parents.
Yeah.
Their moms and their dads. And if there were ever a campaign and a candidacy tailor-made for a push for girl dads on choice, on eliminating exceptions for rape and incest, on the positive role model and leadership and humility and joy that Harris is bringing, this may be a sort of door swinging open for the girl dads for Harris.
Can I just say, as a hopeless bleeding heart liberal who's also an enormous football fan, I didn't think we were going to get football in the national divorce, but I with the Travis Kelce situation, I did not see that happening. But somehow we're sort of ending up with it, and I'm just going to say I will take it.
And note that Kendrick Lamar is going to be in New Orleans, and he's going to be the halftime show, and it's also a theme of the Harris campaign is they not like us.
But in a real way, to your point about the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and that what that is sort of a pop cultural phenomenon. This idea of the sort of weirdness and extremism and J.D. Vance going on all these podcasts where in the manosphere where you talk about how the purpose of a postmenopausal woman and all this stuff, that it is really true that this sort of fringe weirdness is a huge part of what is the modern right, what is the Donald Trump coalition, and the RFK endorsement and all this stuff. And it is a strange cultural moment in which that is their play. Their play is the RFK vote and the Manosphere podcast, versus the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce.
It's the Argentina election.
J.D. Vance is the protege. The only jobs he has really ever had are as the protege of an eccentric right-wing German billionaire who says democracy should have never been attempted and everything's gone downhill since women had the right to vote.
Yeah.
That's the only person he's ever had jobs working for.
For real?
And that's who bought him his U.S. Senate seat, $15 million to give him that Senate seat. It's the only election he's ever run in. And they put him as vice president to Donald Trump. They could have picked somebody to normalize Donald Trump, but instead they picked the intern to the eccentric billionaire who doesn't believe in democracy and who spent a good part of his own political life trying to convince his fellow rich, eccentric right-wing billionaires that they should move to floating shipping containers in the middle of the sea because no land-based continent could contain their brilliance.
And by the way, he is now the person with the second closest finger on the button to a 78-year-old declining senior citizen who you can see right now is cognitively declining. And not only that, but they are running against the whole culture. It's Beyonce and Taylor Swift and Kendrick Lamar.
It's Budweiser and the NFL.
All of it.
It's all of it.
All of it.
But it's a 50-50 race. I mean, just I hate to wrench us back to reality, but it's literally a tied race.
I've never been impressed by celebrity endorsements. I think they are helpful to the base that you already have. They tend to be people who the base already identifies with. This is someone who crosses it all. This is, I think, the most important celebrity endorsement we've ever seen in a presidential campaign, especially because it is so close and it can make that kind of difference. The Harris for President campaign now has the two most perfectly timed and most important endorsements of this campaign. Joe Biden's 27-minute timed endorsement after he said, I'm not the candidate. Perfect timing. It just put a rocket on her to the nomination. This, about 27 minutes after the end of the debate. And it's so important, I think, to the people who are going to be consuming that Taylor Swift endorsement, including those fathers of 8-year-old girls, and that she said, I watched the debate.
Yes.
I didn't decide this yesterday. This is a new candidate. It's a new candidate for all of us. And so I watched a more than 90-minute debate. I watched this candidate against the other candidate, and I thought about it, and here I am. And here's my endorsement. The timing on it is absolutely exquisite. The wording of it is flawless and perfect, right down to the cat lady stuff. It is, for someone who's never been impressed by a celebrity endorsement, this is perfect and powerful.
There is also something that is amazing non-bookends about the Taylor Swift endorsement and the Dick Cheney endorsement.
Yes.
I'm just going to say, same campaign.
It's a big coalition.
It's
big
a
coalition.
really big coalition.